After watching this video, you will think twice before helping someone, or at the very least, you will be more cautious. This is a real story that happened in Koforidua, Ghana, a story of deep friendship, trust, and heartbreaking betrayal. Akwasi Peter had always considered Opong a brother. Before traveling abroad, they had been inseparable, sharing dreams of a better life. Even after many years away, Peter never forgot his friend. So when Opong called one evening, his voice heavy with worry, Peter listened intently. "Peter, my brother, life is squeezing the breath out of me," Opong admitted, his voice breaking. "I can't afford rent anymore. My family is suffering. I need help." Peter sighed, rubbing his forehead. His own family had betrayed him repeatedly, squandering the money he sent for projects. He had learned the hard way that not everyone could be trusted. But Opong was different. "Opong, I have a plan," Peter said, his voice filled with warmth. "I own 2 plots of land in Koforidua. I want to build a mansion there, and I need someone I trust to oversee the project. Since you are struggling, I will send you money to buy your own taxi so you can work independently. I will also pay for you to rent a 3-bedroom apartment in Koforidua so you can be close to the site." There was silence on the other end, then a sudden burst of emotion. "Peter, may the ancestors bless you," Opong cried. "You have saved my life. A good friend is better than a bag full of gold." Within 2 weeks, Peter fulfilled his promises. He sent money for the apartment and the taxi, and soon Opong and his family moved to Koforidua old estate to start afresh. It seemed like a dream come true, but sometimes the hand that lifts you up is the same hand that pushes you. In less than a month, Akwasi Peter sent a large sum of money to Opong along with a 5-bedroom mansion plan. He trusted Opong completely, believing that his childhood friend would never betray him. Excited, Opong took the plan and money home and sat down with his wife, Kwachewa. He told her everything: how Peter had entrusted him with the project, how he had been given money for materials, and how this was an opportunity to rise from the struggles they had faced. Kwachewa listened attentively, then leaned closer and whispered, "My husband, wise up. A river that forgets its source will run dry. You cannot just build a house for another man while we continue to rent. This is a rare opportunity. Make good use of it." Opong hesitated at first, but after much thought, he realized that his wife was right. He had suffered enough, moving from one rented home to another, struggling to put food on the table. Peter was far away, and he trusted him blindly. What harm would it do if he secured his own future while helping Peter? From that moment, Opong's heart changed. He started inflating prices and quantities of materials. If the builders needed 3,000 blocks, he would tell Peter they needed 4,000. If they required 200 bags of cement, he would claim they needed 300. He made secret deals with the suppliers, asking them to overcharge on receipts, then took the excess money for himself. Slowly, the stolen funds added up. He bought his own plot of land in Koforidua and began constructing his own house, using the very money Peter sent for his dream mansion. A child who bites the finger that feeds him will one day beg for crumbs, but Opong had already forgotten who had lifted him from hardship. While constructing Peter's 5-bedroom mansion, Opong was secretly building a 3-bedroom house for himself. His wife, Kwachewa, remained his closest advisor, urging him to think of their future. "Opong, opportunities like this don't come twice," she reminded him. "Peter is far away, and he trusts you. You are making his house exactly as he wants, but who is watching the expenses? If you don't secure our future now, you may never get the chance again. Opong knew she was right. He wasn't neglecting Peter's house. On the contrary, he was making sure it was as grand as Peter had dreamed. But everything came at an inflated cost. The price of labor, the cost of materials, and every little expense was exaggerated. Whenever Peter asked about the budget, Opong would respond with confidence, "My brother, quality is expensive, and I want your house to be the best in the neighborhood." Peter, overwhelmed with gratitude, never suspected a thing. He saw the pictures and videos Opong sent, showing the massive structure taking shape. He smiled, believing his trusted friend was making his dream a reality. Meanwhile, Opong and Kwachewa were making a fortune. The extra money from the inflated costs allowed them to complete their own house alongside Peter's mansion. They even bought 2 additional cars, adding to the one Peter had originally gifted Opong. No longer a taxi driver, Opong now had drivers working for him, making daily sales on his behalf. Kwachewa also flourished. With the surplus money, she invested in gallons of palm oil from villages across Ghana, supplying them in bulk to Togo. Their financial struggles were over, but their deceit was built on the foundation of betrayal. Feed a dog once, and it will remain loyal forever. Feed a human daily, and that same person may be the one to stab you in the back. Peter had given his friend a new life, but Opong had chosen greed over loyalty. One day, Akwasi Peter decided to send his wife Beatrice from Accra to Koforidua to inspect the progress of his dream mansion. He trusted Opong, but wanted someone from his own household to see things firsthand. Beatrice, a woman with sharp instincts, agreed to go. When she arrived, she was impressed by the size and beauty of the structure. The house was indeed being built as Peter had envisioned. But as she walked around the site, talking to the laborers, something unexpected happened. An elderly mason, wiping sweat from his forehead, cautiously approached her. "Madam," he said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "I have something to tell you, but please don't mention my name." Beatrice's heart began to race. "What is it, Papa?" she asked. The mason sighed. "Your husband is a good man, but Opong is not being honest with him. The cost of materials and labor has been inflated. He has been taking extra money from your husband and using it to build his own house. He even has extra cars now." Beatrice felt her stomach drop. She had suspected Opong was benefiting from the project, but she never imagined the extent of his deceit. Without wasting time, she left for Accra that evening and immediately confronted her husband. "Akwasi, I need to talk to you," she said seriously. "The workers told me Opong is stealing from you. He's using your money to build his own house. You need to do something before it's too late." Peter sat in silence for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Beatrice, even my own family betrayed me when I trusted them with my money. If my blood could betray me, how much more a friend? But listen, as long as my dream house is being built, I don't care what he takes. What matters is that I get what I want in the end." Beatrice shook her head. "Akwasi, you are too kind. What if he doesn't even finish your house? What if he keeps taking more?" Peter said to her with a sad smile, "There is an Akan saying, the thief might not steal more than the master. Sometimes it's better to let go of small losses if you want to gain something bigger." Beatrice was not convinced. She knew her husband was being blinded by his trust in Opong. She could only hope that he would wake up before it was too late. Within 2 years and 6 months, Opong had successfully completed Akwasi Peter's 5-bedroom mansion. It stood tall, majestic, and just as Peter had envisioned. But alongside it, in secret, Opong had also completed his own 3-bedroom house. He and his wife, Kwachawa, had become wealthy from the sweat and struggles of a man toiling abroad. Many Ghanaians believe that those living overseas pluck money from trees, forgetting the sleepless nights, the hard labor, and the sacrifices they make just to send money home. Opong and Kwachewa, blinded by greed, had exploited Peter's trust to enrich themselves. With both houses completed, Opong made another cunning move. He rented out his own apartment for a high price, while he and his family moved into Akwasi Peter's mansion under the pretense of being its caretaker. He had no intention of leaving. One evening, as Opong relaxed in Peter's luxurious mansion, his phone rang. It was Peter. "My brother, I don't even know how to thank you," Peter said warmly. "You have built my dream house, and I am forever grateful. But listen, I have made a big decision. Life abroad is too difficult. I need a break. In a month's time, I want to settle in Ghana for a while and start a business." The moment Opong heard those words, his heart sank. A cold shiver ran through his spine, and for a second, he could barely breathe. He quickly forced a smile and responded, "Ah, Peter, that is great news. Ghana will welcome you. Your house is ready for you." But deep down, he was panicking. He had never planned to give the house to Peter. He had grown too comfortable in the mansion and saw it as his own. That night, he turned to his wife, Kwachawa, his face dark with worry. "Kwachawa, Peter says he is coming back to Ghana in a month," he said, pacing up and down. "What do we do? If he comes, I will have to leave this house. I am not ready to give it up." Kwachawa folded her arms and sighed, then turned to her husband with a cunning look in her eyes. "You know Borgas are very rich. Even if Peter comes, he can build another house. He has money. He won't suffer. But if we lose this mansion, we may never live in such comfort again. I know a powerful fetish priest in Koforidua Nkurakan who can help us keep this house forever." Opong hesitated for a moment, but greed had already taken over his soul. He had tasted wealth, and he couldn't imagine going back to struggling. The thought of leaving the mansion haunted him. He nodded slowly. "If that is the only way, then let's go," he said. Greed is like fire. No matter how much wood you put in, it keeps burning. This means that no matter how much a greedy person gets, they are never satisfied, just like fire, which continues to consume wood without stopping. A greedy person always wants more, even at the expense of others. Opong and Kwachawa had once been poor, struggling to pay rent, but instead of being content with their new wealth, their greed had grown. They now wanted to claim something that did not belong to them. That very night, they traveled to Koforidua Nkurakan to meet the fetish priest. The priest was feared by many, known for his dark powers. When they explained their problem, he smiled knowingly and nodded. "You will have what you desire," he said in a deep voice. He handed them a charm, a small wooden doll pierced with multiple pins. "This is the spirit that will guard your wishes. Take it to the house. Speak your desires into it. Each time you say what you want, pierce it with a pin, and when you are done, bury it inside the compound. As long as it remains there, Peter will never have peace in that house." That night, Opong and Kwachawa stood on the compound of Peter's mansion, holding the charm between them. The moonlight cast eerie shadows over the house as they began their incantations. "Peter, if you step your foot in this house, may you know no peace," Opong whispered, driving a pin into the doll. "May your body itch without relief," Kwachawa added, pushing another pin into it. May you feel burning sensations all over your body. Until you leave this house, may you never be well." They continued, each curse followed by the sharp prick of a pin. When they had finished, they dug a hole in the ground and buried the doll, sealing their evil deed. But greed is a bottomless pit. Some poor people have very small mouths and bellies, but once you feed them, their stomachs and mouths grow bigger and bigger, until one day they are willing to devour the very person who has been feeding them. Opong and Kwachewa had forgotten their past. They had forgotten the days when they were homeless, struggling to survive. Instead of gratitude, they now wanted to take everything for themselves. What they didn't know was that evil has a way of coming back to those who practice it. As promised, Akwasi Peter arrived in Ghana. 2 days later, he decided to visit his mansion in Koforidua, eager to see the grand house he had built with his hard-earned money. Before setting off, he called Opong, his trusted friend, to inform him of his visit. Opong, however, was filled with fear. He had been anxiously waiting for this moment, dreading what would happen if the charm he had placed on the house failed. His hands trembled as he held the phone, forcing himself to speak with a steady voice. "I will be waiting for you," he assured Peter, but deep inside, his heart raced. When Peter's car pulled up at the mansion's gate, Opong was already there, waiting to welcome him. He plastered a smile on his face, trying to hide his nervousness. As soon as Peter stepped out of his car and crossed the threshold into his house, an intense wave of discomfort hit him. It was as if he had been bathed in stinging nettle or doused with pepper water. A fiery sensation spread across his body, and an unbearable itching tormented his skin. He gasped, scratching furiously, his breath quickening with panic. The grand house that was supposed to bring him joy had instead become a source of torment. Unable to bear the agony, he turned and fled, jumping back into his car and speeding away. A week later, determined to reclaim his home, Peter returned to the mansion. He stepped inside once more, hoping that the previous incident had been a mistake, a strange reaction of the body to the weather or the atmosphere. But no, this time, the burning was even worse. It felt as though invisible flames were consuming his skin, and sharp needles were piercing every inch of his body. The pain was unbearable. With a cry of frustration, he dashed out of the house, slamming the car door behind him and driving straight back to Accra. His wife noticed his distress, but did not understand its cause. Every evening she would ask, "When are we moving into our new house?" Peter, avoiding her gaze, would mutter, "At the right time." But she was not a woman to be easily dismissed. "How can we continue living in this rented house in Accra when we have a big mansion in Koforidua?" she pressed. Her persistence irritated him. "I said don't disturb me about that house again," he snapped. His voice was sharp, his tone final. She stared at him, confused and frustrated. To her, it made no sense. They had worked hard for that house. They had planned a future there. What could possibly be stopping him from moving in? But Peter could not explain. How could he tell his wife that his own house rejected him, that each time he entered, unseen forces tormented him, burning his flesh with an invisible fire? He chose silence over shame, anger over explanation. Meanwhile, Opong, the so-called friend, watched from the shadows. He had seen Peter flee his own home twice. He had witnessed the charm take effect. Yet, instead of relief, a new fear gnawed at him. Yes, the charm had worked. Yes, Peter could not stay in the house. But for how long? Would the spirits remain on his side, or would they one day turn against him too? As the old African proverb warns, when the rat laughs at the cat, There is a hole nearby. Clearly, Peter had lost all interest in the house. It was as if his mind had been wiped clean of any attachment to the mansion he had once proudly built. What was even more painful was that he had established a thriving business in Koforidua, the very town where his mansion stood, yet he chose to rent an apartment instead of living in his own house. His wife never understood this strange behavior. To her, it made no sense. How could a man who owned a luxurious house prefer to pay rent elsewhere? She asked and asked, but Peter always brushed off her concerns. Then one day, out of the blue, he told her, "I have given the house to my friend. I am no longer interested in it. At the right time, I will build a house even better than the one Opong built for me." His wife stood in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. The house Opong built for him. What did he mean by that? Hadn't Peter built that house with his own hard-earned money? Hadn't they spent years dreaming about it, designing every detail together? How could he now speak as if it belonged to Opong? It was as though the charm had completely taken his mind off his own property. The mansion that once meant everything to him was now nothing in his eyes. The landowner had become a tenant, and the tenant had become a house owner. It was like royals walking barefoot while their slaves and servants rode on horseback. For 5 years, Peter, his wife, and their children continued to live in a rented apartment, even though his own house stood tall and majestic in Koforidua. Meanwhile, Opong was now the proud owner of Peter's mansion. Not only that, but he had also built another house for himself. He was now a man of status, living in luxury while the rightful owner of the land lived like a stranger in his own town. Sometimes Opong would deliberately call Peter, pretending to be concerned. "My friend and my brother, when are you coming back to your house?" he would ask, his voice filled with false sympathy. But Peter's response was always the same. "Oh, my dear brother, I am no longer interested in the house. Keep it, it is yours. I have given it to you from my heart. I am planning to build a new one soon." Each time he heard these words, Opong felt a deep sense of relief. The charm had worked perfectly. Peter had not only abandoned his house, but had willingly gifted it to him. He no longer feared that Peter would one day change his mind and come back to reclaim what was his. But as the elders say, if you wash a monkey with soap, it will still return to the forest dirty. No matter how much kindness Peter had shown him in the past, Opong had repaid him with evil. He had taken advantage of his friend's trust, using dark means to take what did not belong to him. 8 years after taking possession of Peter's house, Opong had become a wealthy man. He and his wife, Quachawa, lived in luxury. They had money, status, and property, but something had changed in Opong. With wealth came arrogance, and with arrogance came recklessness. Opong began neglecting his wife, spending his nights with other women, moving from one beer bar to another, returning home only when he pleased. The man who once feared losing everything was now blinded by his own success. Quachawa, the woman who had stood by his side through all the struggles, was now treated like an afterthought. At first, she thought his behavior was because of their newfound wealth. Perhaps success had made him careless. But soon, it became clear that this was not just a phase. This was who Opong had become. One night, Quachawa received information that her husband was in a hotel with another woman. Heart pounding with anger and pain, she got into her car and drove straight to the hotel. She parked outside, took a deep breath and stormed in, determined to confront him. When she found him, he was relaxed, drinking and laughing with his mistress, as if he had no worries in the world. The moment she confronted him, expecting at least some remorse, he responded with insults. Instead of apologizing or even showing shame, Opong humiliated her in front of his girlfriend. To make matters worse, the other woman, emboldened by Opong's lack of respect for his wife, pounced on Kwachewa and beat her mercilessly. Opong sat back and watched, refusing to intervene. The same man who had once fought to secure a future for himself was now allowing his own wife to be disgraced by a stranger. 2 months later, Opong took his cruelty even further. He divorced Kwachewa and threw her out of the house. The woman who had been his partner, the one who had endured his struggles, was now discarded like she meant nothing. As compensation for all the years she had invested in their marriage, he gave her only 200,000 cedis, a fraction of what she had contributed to building their wealth. Meanwhile, he kept both houses for himself, securing his comfort while she was left to start over. But Opong had forgotten one thing, the very proverb that now applied to him. If you are chewing the hand of a chimpanzee, look at your own hand too, because the hand of a chimpanzee is similar to that of a human. He had once taken advantage of Peter, thinking he had won, but now he was doing the same thing to his wife. Just as he had heartlessly taken Peter's house, he had now taken everything from Kwachewa. What he failed to realize was that betrayal does not go unpunished. Opong believed that he was untouchable, but life has a way of balancing itself. Just as Peter had been unfairly robbed of his home, Opong had now robbed his wife of her dignity and security. But the cycle of betrayal does not stop without consequence. 3 months after their divorce, Kwachewa was still consumed by bitterness. She could not forgive Opong for what he had done to her. After standing by him through their struggles, she had been cast aside like she was nothing. The betrayal burned in her heart, and she wanted nothing more than to see Opong suffer the way she had suffered. One day, driven by anger and the desire for justice, she made a bold decision. If Opong had stolen Peter's house through dark means, then removing the charm should strip him of what he had unjustly gained. She called home to ask their children if Opong was at the mansion. When they responded that he was not, she saw it as the perfect opportunity. Without hesitation, she drove to the house, determined to undo what had been done. Arriving at the mansion, she walked to the exact spot where the charm had been buried. She knew where it was. She had been there when it was placed. With trembling hands, she picked up a shovel and began digging. The soil was soft, and within minutes she saw it, a strange object wrapped in cloth, buried beneath the earth. The moment she uncovered it, a chill ran through her spine. As soon as she removed the charm, a strange force seemed to take hold of her. Her body began to itch uncontrollably. A searing, burning sensation spread across her skin, growing more unbearable with each passing second. She let out a cry of agony, scratching wildly at her arms and back. It was as if invisible fire was consuming her. She collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain, but the torment did not stop. A few hours later, Opong returned home. As soon as he stepped inside, his eyes widened in shock. There, on the floor, was Kwachewa, scratching furiously, her skin red and inflamed from the relentless itching. Her cries filled the house. But what caught his attention even more was the sight of the charm, unearthed and exposed. His heart pounded. The charm had been removed. The very thing that had given him power over Peter's house was now lying lifeless in the open. At that moment, as if the spirits had been waiting for him, Opong felt a sharp sting across his own body. Within seconds his skin began to burn, the same excruciating sensation that tormented Kwachewa, now consuming him as well. He gasped, scratching wildly, trying to stop the unbearable itching, but nothing helped. Nobody around them understood what was happening, but Opong and Kwachawa knew the truth. They knew what they had done. They knew the price they were now paying for their actions. The same suffering that had driven Peter away from his own home had now come back to claim them. For years, Opong had lived in luxury, thinking he had escaped justice. But justice, though slow, never fails to arrive. The Akan proverb holds true. If a bird dies in the sky, its feathers will surely fall on the ground. Opong had soared high, thinking he had outwitted fate, but no one cheats destiny forever. Just as Peter had suffered, so too did Opong and Kwachawa. The house they had stolen, the peace they had enjoyed, was now tainted with their own pain. When a person commits an evil act, they may think they have escaped the consequences, but the truth always finds a way to surface. Just as a dead bird's feathers must eventually fall to the earth, so too must every wrongdoing come back to its source. No one can escape justice forever. The suffering they caused Peter had finally come home to them. What goes around always comes around. That evening, Akwasi Peter was sitting at home with his wife when he suddenly felt an overwhelming sensation, as if something dark and heavy had lifted from his soul. It was as though a bad spirit had been cast out of his body, freeing him from a prison he never knew he was in. For the first time in years, his mind felt clear. He looked around the small rented apartment in confusion, his heart pounding with a mix of shock and realization. His eyes widened as he turned to his wife, his voice filled with urgency. "Why are we still renting? Where is my mansion? Where am I now? What has happened to me?" His wife stared at him, stunned by the sudden change in his demeanor. The man who had dismissed every conversation about the house for years was now demanding answers. Peter didn't wait for a response. A sense of urgency gripped him. He grabbed his car keys and rushed out of the house, driving straight to his mansion. The roads seemed unfamiliar, yet eerily familiar at the same time, as though he was waking from a long, strange dream. His heart raced as he approached the grand mansion, the house he had abandoned without reason, the house he had forgotten. What he saw upon arrival was shocking. Opong and his wife, Kwachawa, were in front of the house, rolling on the ground, scratching their bodies uncontrollably. Their skin was red and inflamed, their clothes torn from desperate attempts to relieve themselves of the unbearable, burning sensation. Their cries echoed through the night, a pitiful sound of suffering and regret. Peter stood frozen for a moment, watching the scene unfold before him. Then, as if struck by a revelation, he understood everything: the missing years, the strange detachment from his home, the unexplained fear of entering his own mansion. It all made sense now. Opong and Kwachawa, consumed by agony, looked up at Peter with tear-filled eyes. Their pride, their arrogance, all of it had melted away under the weight of their suffering. They fell to their knees, confessing everything. "Peter, forgive us. We wronged you. We stole your house. We used dark powers to make you forget your own home." Opong cried out, his voice breaking. "We never thought it would come to this. Please, help us." Peter's face remained emotionless as he listened to their pleas. He had trusted Opong once. He had considered him a brother. But this man had repaid his kindness with evil, taking what was not his and casting Peter aside as if he were nothing. Desperate to end their suffering, Opong and Kwachawa decided to seek help from the only person who could reverse the curse, the fetish priest who had performed the ritual years ago. They hurriedly left for his shrine, still scratching and wailing, but upon their arrival, they were met with devastating news. The fetish priest had died a few weeks ago. Panic set in. They turned to the new priest, begging him for help. But the young priest shook his head. "I cannot undo what was done," he said. "This is beyond my power." Hopelessness settled over them. There was no cure, no escape. The same dark forces they had used to steal from Peter had now turned against them. Meanwhile, Peter stood in front of his mansion, feeling an overwhelming sense of justice. He had lost 8 years of his life, trapped under a spell, living like a tenant while another man enjoyed his wealth. But now the spell was broken. His mind was clear, and his house was his once again. Without hesitation, Peter evicted Opong and his wife from the mansion. They had no choice but to leave, still suffering from the relentless torment they had brought upon themselves. As Peter stepped inside his home, a deep sense of peace washed over him. The house, once tainted by deceit and betrayal, now belonged to him once more. This was his, and no one would take it from him again. Justice had been served. The Akan elders say, "No matter how high a bird flies, it will one day land on the ground." Opong had flown high, believing he had outsmarted fate. But in the end, fate had caught up with him, and he had fallen, just as surely as the bird must return to earth. Desperate for a cure, Opong and Quachawa did everything within their power to find relief from their torment. They sold everything they had achieved, their houses, their cars, their businesses, just to fund their search for healing. They moved from one fetish priest to another, from one malam to another, from one pastor to another, seeking divine intervention. But every door they knocked on led to the same hopeless answer. There was no cure. By the time they realized the truth, they had lost everything. The wealth they had stolen, the comfort they had enjoyed, and the power they once wielded, all gone. Their families, seeing their pitiful state, took them back to Suhum, where they were forced to stay in their family house, hoping that time or fate would bring them healing. But nothing changed. No one knew exactly what became of them, but years later, word spread that both Opong and Quachawa had died, still suffering from the same itching and burning sensation that had haunted them for years. They had perished in the very pain they had inflicted upon another. What are we looking for in this world? Why the greed and envy? Every poor person appears to be in need of pity, and sometimes out of kindness we might feel compelled to help them. But the painful truth is that some of them will turn against you, betray you, and even destroy you if given the chance. Some people remain poor not because of fate, but because their minds are filled with evil. No matter how much you try to rescue them from the pit, they will find a way to drag you down with them. They see kindness as weakness, generosity as an opportunity for deceit. Yet, in the midst of all this, there are still good-hearted people among the poor, people with pure intentions who truly deserve help and opportunities. Unfortunately, the wickedness of others has made it difficult for the good ones to receive the support they need. May we be delivered from such wicked and envious people. May our kindness never be turned into a weapon against us. May our hard-earned properties never fall into the hands of deceitful family and friends. Type Amen to receive this blessing. If you love this story, please subscribe to Anansi Web of Tales and let us know where you are watching from. According to YouTube, liking, sharing, and commenting on our videos helps them reach more people. So please support us by doing so. Thank you for the love and support.